That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.
Hello and welcome to Content and Capable, where I try to figure out what it really means to adult. Today I spoke to Claire Molitoris all about her life as a professional seamstress and her experiences working for Disney on cruise ships and a variety of other locations. Welcome to Content and Capable, Claire. It's been really nice to see you and chat to you.
Yeah.
I suppose we better get started. We're talking about Disney today. How did you get working for Disney?
So my senior year of college, I applied for the Disney College program. So I was accepted for a 9-month, basically, internship that I did. And it was from May to December. And I was able to just apply, basically, and get in. I had my background in theater, and that's what I applied for. And I think basically my resume spoke for itself, and that was what kind of got my foot in the door.
Wow. So your resume must have been pretty loaded, just because I'd assume that that application process would have been pretty intense. Sorry. So what was the kind of things you did in high school?
So a lot of what I did in high school was theater. Primarily, I'm a seamstress, so I do a lot of the behind the scenes sewing work. And I started to sew when I was 8 years old. I just kind of had always had that as part of my life. And when I got to high school, I kind of saw an opportunity for sewing and theater to combine into sort of the costuming aspect of backstage theater.
Wow. And what were some of the projects you worked on through, middle school and high school?
Yeah, I did a lot of sort of both personal work and school-related work. So on the school-related side, I was part of a number of shows we did. A lot of the other students were performers, and I made a couple costumes and mostly did a lot of repair work and just, making them look pretty. And then on the side, I did a lot of my own personal things of making my own clothes, making clothes for friends and family. And then just, the general boring sort of repair work, sewing on a button, fixing a zipper, all the kind of things you think of an old lady doing.
And that's definitely very interesting. I come from a family of 10, and so a lot of the time we are just fixing things all the time, hemming, buttons, everything. So it's I definitely get that day-to-day, work. Did you ever while you were doing this in middle school and high school, ever turn around and go, no, this isn't really cool, I don't, want to continue it? Did you ever struggle with that?
I never really thought, I didn't want to continue it, but I always kind of thought it was a side project that, I wasn't going to go to college for theater. I was going to do, something in the science field, and this sewing work would be my hobby, my side business.
Yeah.
But then basically I realized, why push it aside? It can be my focus.
100%. And when you went and applied for Disney, were you applying for other things at the same time?
Yeah. So I actually, at first, I just generally applied to Disney in general, just trying to get a job. And I primarily was hoping for something theater related, but, not necessarily as specific as in their costuming department. But then I got a call, and basically they were like, you want to do the laundry and do all the sort of, repair work that, we hire old ladies to do? Sure, we'll hire you to do it. If, in their minds, it's not as grand as and incredible as, some people think it is.
Yeah. And I suppose, there is that stigma around it. Have you ever had people turn around and tell you that you aren't doing a real job?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I most recently, I've also started working on cruise ships, and a lot
Mm.
of the cruise ship work, is sort of, oh, well, this is, the fun job. You're just doing like a fun messing around, doing whatever. When are you going to get your real job? And, this is a career. This is my real job.
Yeah. And, when, I work in the arts, I'm a journalist and a musician. And so I find very struggle trying to get paid for my work. Have you ever had people turn around and go, can you just do this for free?
Yeah, I definitely all the time, especially with sort of, the sort of friends, it's more of a friend that finds out I can do
Hmm.
something, that are sort of like, well, this is good experience for you. How about, I charge, nothing. And I'm like, well, no, I'm like, I still, my time, my supplies, like, I'm still a
Mm.
human being.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I don't think it's limited to the arts. I've just moved into a new place and we've been renovating it as well. And the whole idea of, you can just do it for free. It's only going to take 10 minutes. And then 3 hours later, we're installing the fans ourselves in the pitch black at 9 o'clock at night, going, oh, really wish we paid someone to do this.
Yeah.
Um, but like, so when you got into Disney, where were you working initially?
So when I first got there, I started working in Animal Kingdom, and primarily on the Festival of the Lion King show that they have there.
Mm.
So I started out doing laundry because that's, sort of the bottom of the barrel job that you start with. And we did 8 shows a day. So there was a lot of laundry to do as um,
Wow.
primarily we would have the main actors would do 3 shows and then leave, and then new people would come in, but then for the like smaller cast member like ensemble, that would be a new
Mm.
person every show, so there was always all these leotards and socks and undergarments to clean.
Wow, you're like the ultimate mum of a theater, just doing all the washing.
Yeah, we had like 5 washing machines because they, sorted everything. Everything had specialty care instructions to keep it
Mm.
going because that show's been running for almost 15 years and it's some of the original costumes from then. So they're old and beat up and you got to take care of them.
Yeah, and I suppose, there's that kind of pressure as well of, I better not, do something that is going to like irreversibly damage these costumes. Were you ever like kind of really stressed about that?
Yeah, it was, especially at night. We would have, like an extra half hour sort of cleanup time. And if you, took a second to stop and think about it, you might waste too much time. And then you end up, missing time to clock out, and then you get in trouble for staying too long. So it was sort of
Mhm.
the combination of you got to do it quickly, but you also got to do it right.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm a very confused Australian. I know that there are two Disney parks. Were you
Yes.
working in Florida then?
Yes,
Yeah,
in Florida.
awesome. Awesome. I've got a kind of an understanding of both of them. I actually have been to Disney in LA, but I still get a little confused from time to time because there are so many parks, which is awesome at least. So
Yeah.
where did you go from there?
So from there, I stayed in the same place pretty much, but I went over to another show that they have in the same park,
Hmm.
which is Finding Nemo the musical. So it was a very different experience because it is a lot smaller of a show. There's not, this whole big cast with, multiple shows. There were only 5 shows a day, so it was a lot
Hmm.
smaller. And it's also, if they have puppets, they have, people on wires, like, flying on the stage. Like it's a lot more of a theatrical production that involved really being on my toes, quick change, helping actors get dressed, and just being
Hmm.
really involved versus laundry.
Yeah. And so was that where you started to incorporate, some of the skills that you've been developing through middle school and high school?
Yeah. So there's where I really got a chance to do a lot of repair work. We had a lot of things where sort of, bedazzled with like little gems and, those
Mhm.
fly off every 10 seconds. So there was a lot of, glue and everything, just trying to make things look nice and get them out there as quickly as possible for these performers.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Like I can't even like fathom, you just there's a team of you guys sitting backstage, just meticulously putting these tiny things that you barely would see from the audience in the back of the theater or whatever.
Mhm.
That that's awesome. And so like how then did you get to cruise ships and onto working for them?
Yeah. So after Disney, I had to leave in December. They basically kicked me out because they
Mhm.
only had me for a short time. And so after that, 2020 hit. So I graduated college in the middle of a pandemic, and I was basically expecting to go back down to Disney. I, had made a bunch of connections. I knew people. I was going to go back and, work full time, but they weren't hiring, and they're still barely hiring. So I
Mhm.
had to find something else, and no theaters were open. Everybody was shut down with COVID. So the cruise ships were open. They were starting to come back. And I found a random website. I sent my application and I got a call that they wanted me to go out on the ship.
That's awesome. And like when you were, like go from Disney and then, doing a college degree and, the pandemic, um, was there a point where you considered maybe, I don't pursue this further and I, pivot to something else?
Yeah, I've always kind of had in the back of my mind, maybe a career in theater is, unimaginable and it's a fantasy because it feels like one sometimes. So it was definitely really hard when I graduated to be like, did I just put in 4 years for nothing? And should I explore something else? Should I go back to school and get a different degree? And really just, that whole what am I doing with my life kind of situation.
Yeah, I always think of like the meme, like "Who am I?" from like Harry Potter,
Yeah.
which I think is very pertinent to this. But in terms of then jumping on those cruise ships, and what kind of work do you do there?
So that work was really, really using my skills. And we did a lot of sewing and repair work. And a lot of those costumes sat on the ship for over a year while, everyone
Mhm.
was freaking out about COVID, trying to figure out when the cruise industry was coming back. So people literally left in the middle of the night because these ships, suddenly got quarantined and people just up and left. So we sort of had
Wow.
to go in and pick everything up and kind of try to put everything back together and get it ready for guests and cruising again.
Wow. And I suppose the cruise industry is back into full swing now in America.
Yeah, pretty much. I went out on the cruise in March, and I was one of the first cruises to go out. And it was only crew people. There were no guests or
Mhm.
actual people on the ships yet. It was just sort of the prep work. And then around June, July is really when it started up again. So now it's really, fully
Yeah.
back to what it was pre-pandemic, but still a little iffy.
Yeah, I remember very early in the pandemic, we had a big cruise ship that was kind of stuck off the coast of Australia and it came in. There was heaps of people who tested positive for
Mhm.
COVID from that ship. And we were, very worried. And there was a lot of discussion about how this might be the end of the cruise industry. But it's very interesting that you say that, it's kind of back into the full swing of things. Kind of some hope for that industry, I suppose.
Yeah, so it's still really scary. I mean, I'm going back out on a cruise at the end of October, and I had to
Mhm.
sign so many waivers about how, they're not held accountable if COVID, breaks out, if I get COVID, if something happens to me. And it's scary that this is sort of my job, that this is just what I basically have to do at this point unless I want to change careers.
Yeah. And I suppose it's like, I don't know, my father works for an airline at the moment, and he's just been told he has to be vaccinated. He got his first jab the other day. And but he was so concerned because he is like the only breadwinner. And when you're like your own breadwinner, you're not relying on someone else. It kind of is scary. And you go, what if I can't work? What if I don't have, anything beyond there? And into the future, do you want to go back to Disney then?
Yeah, that is still my goal. I pretty much check the Disney career website almost every day. I'm still looking and hoping for some jobs to pop back up. I'm emailing all of my old managers, trying to find somebody that'll offer me a job.
That's awesome. I really love that passion, because there's not often where like someone go into like a really specific industry and go, I just want to work for this person. And sometimes they're just like, I'll get work wherever I can get it. But yeah, I suppose then looking into like the future, obviously you said you wanted to work for Disney, but what does, the job that you would love to get look like in Disney?
I would absolutely love to get a job in their workrooms where they actually make the costumes from scratch with absolutely, nothing. And they come out with, these amazing ball gowns for the parades, and just, making the princesses look like they do in the movies, and sort of creating that magic from the ground. That's really where I'd like to be.
Yeah. And like, when you go to create those costumes, what are some of the things you think about, or would theoretically think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is there's already so much material out there that, because Disney is it's more than a theme park. There's the TV shows, movies, there's, books and everything, that anything you could possibly want to make, you can find 100 pictures of it or 100 videos of what it should look like. So I'm excited for sort of the creating something real that has only been imagined before.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when you go to create a piece, a costume, or a dress or whatever, what's your creative process there?
So I really love to do research. I feel like that's the start of any good art project, is research. And especially something like Disney, there's just so much to research, so much to look into, 1,000 little details that really matter to someone. And from research, then doing sketches, rough draft, kind of getting a rough image, maybe even a rough 3D model with paper, or little pieces of scraps, just to get something tangible to look at before diving into the actual fabrics I'm going to use, making pattern pieces and sewing it all together and adding all those details and finishing touches on top.
Yeah. And so like, how long would that process look like from start to finish?
I would estimate that would probably take a couple weeks, maybe up to a month, depending on how elaborate of a piece it is.
Yeah, it's a long time of, naturally, that whole creative process takes a while, takes a lot of energy. What have been some of your favorite things that you have created yourself?
One of my favorite things I made my senior year of college was a bunch of corsets. I took a whole corset making class and learned sort of the history of, when they were actually worn as everyday garments, and then sort of how they've been modernized and sort of used now more as costume pieces, and, sort of the burlesque industry that really, uses them as a big piece. And I got to make 2 or 3 that I was really proud of, that I put hundreds of hours into, and they're such great showpieces I have now.
Wow. And you get to keep those kind of works that you do?
Yeah. So anything that was sort of classwork, I get to hang on to.
That's awesome. I I'm always very jealous of people who have like a physical, tangible thing that they get to like show to people that is their major work. A lot of my work is like online or like writing or video. So you don't like have something in your house. You go, look, this is what I made.
Mhm.
So it's that's, you know, amazing. And I suppose, what has been your like biggest challenge so far?
I think one of the hardest challenges, which you sort of already mentioned earlier, is well, when are you going to get your real career? When is the fun over? In that
Mhm.
it is fun. It's, I really chose to do something that makes me happy versus something that would, make me money or, make me famous or anything like that. So the hardest part
Mhm.
is really just continuing on with criticism.
Yeah, and I suppose that's quite tough sometimes when you know that you are following your dreams. Have you ever like gone, have you ever considered, what if I didn't follow my dreams and look down that path?
Yeah, I definitely, I was fully prepared to go into the science field. I was going to be a forensic scientist. I took classes. I love true crime. I was really into,
Mhm.
science. That's what my family wants to see me do, wants to see me, a woman in the science field. Like that'll be, a big deal. I can make a
Yeah.
difference in the world. And, so I think about that sometimes. And how much I feel like how much more stressful my life would be if I were pursuing something that, was so technical and so, not creative. I'm such a creative person that, this is what I need to be doing. I wouldn't have succeeded in that.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, and how I don't know, you think of theater, and you think of, the kind of work that you might be doing. You think it's quite stressful, but at the same time, there's almost that adrenaline rush that kind of counterbalances it, which I find very fascinating. As I play trombone, and I've worked on a couple of musicals in my time, and it's been real amazing to see, no matter how much of a time constraint there is, that adrenaline kind of counteracts the stress, which
Mhm.
is, I don't know, it's very awesome, highly addictive as well, I think.
Yeah, and it's just fun. I feel like that's the
Yeah.
difference is that it can be stressful, but in the end, you're doing it for a reason. It's entertaining, it's
Mhm.
fun versus the science field where it's not fun. You're not having fun doing that. You're just doing a job.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's someone who finds joy in, doing science. I've, moved in with my brother who's doing a physics degree at the moment, and he can talk about that for days on end. But just not fun to someone like me who, loves the adrenaline rush of those kind of creative pursuits. And I suppose, what's been the most memorable like project that you've worked on so far?
Well, I did actually a really cool project. It was my sophomore year of college, I believe. Yeah. We did Legally Blonde, the musical, at school in the fall. And I was really, as a sophomore, kind of starting to get, my feet wet in working on some actual projects. And I
Mhm.
really got to work up close with a lot of the performers and really get my first experience working with an actor and kind of learning that process of fitting them in a costume, making them feel good, which then makes the show look good, and really learning about the process that goes into making a costume more than just the physical sewing aspect.
Yeah, and it comes together, and you go, "Wow, that's, amazing." I've spent all these hours working on it, and it finally clicks. It's like that aha moment, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, uh, when you like are creating dresses and things like that, has there ever been like times where you're going, "Oh, I really want to do this," but you turn around and you're either told, or you tell yourself, "Oh, I actually can't do it that way," or "can't do it with this or that"?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of my job is looking at pictures and then trying to make it a reality. And a lot of
Mhm.
times things that are drawn on paper are just not physically possible. It's a big part of actually the education in costuming is you have to understand what you're drawing, that what you're drawing can be physically made, because sometimes it can't. Sometimes, no matter what fabric you have, it won't flow like that. It won't lay correctly. And you really just have to start over and really think about, how can I get this without actually doing it how they want it to be?
Yeah, and looking at that creative process and going, can I actually do it? And I suppose, like, where do you draw that line of where it is physically possible and it isn't physically possible?
It's really hard to draw that line, especially when you're a really creative person. It's easy to be like, well, you know what? Let me try it. It's never been done and I don't know how to do it, but I have an idea. I have the skills. Maybe it'll work. Maybe if I do this little change, it'll magically all come together and be incredible.
Yeah. And like, does that, have you, when you have like that hasn't worked out, what are some of the thought process that it goes through your head when you do try something and it doesn't quite work out?
It's really hard. It's almost like solving a puzzle sometimes is what I feel like, that, you almost go back to square one, and it's sort of like, all right, well, path A didn't work. So what if we, slightly move this here and move that over? And it's a lot of just forget everything I just did. That didn't work. I got to start over, which can be really hard. And especially when you thought that was going to work and you were so close, but it just didn't get there.
Yeah, it's annoying. I sat down at 9:30 last night and I realized the assignment that I've been working on for the last 3 weeks needed to be completely rewritten. And I was like, do I have like the energy and the stamina to do this again? It's just, have you ever like turned around and gotten like halfway through a project and gone, nah, I'm not going to do it? This is, too hard. We need to, completely restart.
Yeah, it happens a lot, because especially with sewing, there is an order of operations. And if you do things out of order, then you're suddenly like, oh crap, I can't do this. I have to start over. I have to rip everything apart, and it has to go in a certain order to lay correctly and to look nice.
Yeah. And when that, order of operations, what is that order of operations actually?
It really depends on the project, but a lot of times, like for instance, if you're making a dress, a lot of times it's easy to think, let's put, the front and back together, then put the sleeves on, and then do the hem, and then we'll put some other detail work. But a lot of times it might be, oh, well, first we have to put a dart in, then we have to put the shoulders together, and then we're going to open it up and put the sleeves on, and then we're going to close the side and put the hem on. And it's not always the logical answer, because there's some tiny detail that's different. There's some weird seam that it's not going to work if you do it in your normal order.
And when you do, like, is that kind of thing you learn through experience, or do you learn that through formal education, like in college?
It's a little bit of both. Sometimes there is sort of you just learn it, and it's sort of like, solving a math equation, that there's a way to do it, and you always follow steps 1 through 10 and you get there. But sometimes, you have to go out of order, because you find a trick that works better. A teacher tells you about something that, if you do step 5 first, you'll figure out it's easier then to do the next step, even if it's not technically correct.
Yeah. That's, I've really struggled with, I get into like a rut and I go, I'll just do it the same way every time. For example, when I go to reach out to people via email for interviews or even for the podcast, I kind of like copy and paste it. And then I realize that actually that isn't the best. And sometimes I just got to like adjust it a little bit more to like fit the context a little bit better. And I suppose that's kind of the same thing. Um,
Yeah, and very much that, it's not fun to just do it the same way every time. It adds some excitement to switch it up, try
yeah.
something different, even if it fails. It was still a fun experience to not just be doing the same repetitive thing over and over again.
Yeah. And, for anyone who's considering going into, a similar area of theatre, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I think a lot of the big advice is just do what makes you happy. And I feel like one of my favorite quotes is do what you love, what you do. And I really just feel like there's always going to be some worry, there's always going to be some concern. But if it's what you want to do, you just got to do it. You just got to dive in and
Mhm.
learn to sew, learn to draw, learn to do anything that'll help you advance your career.
Wow, that's awesome. And, in terms of combining this with like the real world adult stuff, do you ever feel like that, like you sit down to have like an adult conversation with someone, you feel like the child in the room?
Oh, all the time. Anytime I talk to my friends, I'm always like, I still am bouncing between jobs and I don't really know what I'm doing versus my friends that work in the medical field and, you know, they're getting their sort of, big girl jobs working in a
Mhm.
hospital and they're working their way up the corporate ladder. And I'm still just like messing around with a sewing machine.
Yeah. And, I think that that's, I don't know, in my experience, that's a common problem with all creative jobs. I'll sit down to have a conversation with someone who works in science and engineering. And, I'm a journalist. I should be able to like have a proper conversation with them. But I definitely feel like the child who's just, sitting in the corner of my bedroom writing, crazy things and, being on camera instead of working a proper job in an office.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard, especially at least in my life and I feel like in a lot of people's lives. I don't have a lot of other super creative friends. I have friends who
Mhm.
do it as their side business or their hobby, but very few people sort of have the courage to pursue it full time.
Yeah, and taking that dive is especially hard, in my opinion. Going, I'm going to do this because I came from a similar position. I graduated in 2019 and from high school, and was like sitting there between, do I go into a creative pursuit, take that dive, or do I go into the boring science and kind of figure out what I'm going to do there? And I was passionate about both. But, taking that plunge, I'm so glad I took the plunge and decided to go into a creative pursuit because I think I would have hated myself for continuing with science.
Mhm.
Um, and in terms of, taking that plunge and like setting yourself up for success, what are some of the ways that you kind of go, yes, I'm doing a creative thing, but like I've got to, keep this in mind. What are the kind of things you keep in mind when you go and do that kind of stuff?
I think it's really easy to sort of just switch on and off the sort of adult brain and the creative brain. And I feel like for me, one of the biggest things is trying to keep them connected and be like, yes,
Mhm.
I'm going to mess around for a couple hours, but I still got to pay that bill later and I still have to go to the dentist. That it's not two separate lives. It's all the same thing that are intermixing and not
Mhm.
being kept separated.
Yeah, and it's hard because we're very good at compartmentalizing. I'll worry about this later, and like ignoring it for however many hours we sit down to do, whatever we're mucking around with. And have you ever had points where you've turned around and realized, oh, I've been sitting down here for 7 hours, and now I've missed everything.
Yeah, it especially when I first kind of started doing this sort of just, I call it messing around with my sewing machine, but
Mhm.
just these sort of little projects that there's no deadline, there's no customer, it's just for fun. It was very easy for me to just shut the door to my sewing room and 5 hours go by and I'm just like, oh, I completely missed lunch today because you just get so absorbed in working when you're really, going and you just have this flow.
Yeah, I'm notorious for missing lunch. I get, mum was telling me this story the other day of when my younger siblings were born and dad was looking after me all by myself while mum was in the hospital. And dad comes into the hospital to, come and check up on mum and, check on the babies and bits and pieces. And turns around to her and he goes, Sam's been really grumpy recently, and I've just figured out why. It's because I forget to feed him lunch. I'm glad I have enough of a body clock that I get grumpy if I don't eat lunch, so I can realize, oh, I really should eat lunch. But there are days sometimes where you get so engrossed in something. You go, I've got to keep doing this, got to keep moving forward and keep working on it, and you just completely forget that you've got other work that you've got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that we have been chatting that we mightn't have brushed on that you want to chat about?
I don't think so. I feel like everything I was thinking of talking about, you already asked and brought up.
Wow, I have done my job properly. Then
Yeah.
I've almost finished my journalism major for my degree, and it's been a wild ride. And I really enjoyed it because I've done some really awesome projects and worked on some really amazing things. But I still got another 6 months to go doing a media and communications major for my degree. And it's all real academic, writing essays. And I hate writing essays with a burning passion. And I'm sitting here and, I'm writing an essay for an ethics class I'm doing at the moment. And I'm going, can it be over? I finished writing it at 8:30 this morning. And, I've jumped on here and then I've got to edit this and another episode before I go on holidays. It's why do I set myself up for failure every time?
Well, in some ways it's, you have to. It's the way people work. I have to be busy. If I have downtime, that's when I mess things up.
Oh yeah, 100%. I get bored and sign myself up for things, and then I realize I've way overcommitted, and I'm doing 7 things at once. I really shouldn't have let myself be bored. I should have filled myself up with little tasks and little jobs that I could have been doing instead of signing up for this random thing that now I have to spend 7 hours doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a wild ride. Well, thank you so much, Claire, for coming on and chatting about your work and seamstressing for Disney. Where can people find you on the internet?
I do have a website. It's my name, which is clairemolitoris.com. And I also, I did start an Instagram. It's not super updated or filled out yet. But that's also just my name, Claire Molitoris.
Wow. And I suppose I completely forgot to ask you, have you been doing projects on the side other than those big corporate gigs?
I have a little bit here and there, mostly just a lot of, friends and family need pants hemmed or things, but I am making a lot of face masks still. That's kind of what helped me survive a lot of 2020 was just making face masks, selling them for a couple bucks here and there just to make ends meet.
Yeah, when we had mask mandates introduced, we all kind of I think it was about 12 months ago that I don't know, it was weird. I think we decided to buy fabric masks after wearing them for a couple, the paper masks for a couple of months. But supporting those local businesses was something that we really had to consider when we went and bought these masks. So it was, it's awesome to hear that you were doing that. And has there been any media that you've been consuming that you want to plug?
I don't think I could think of off the top of my head at the moment. I wasn't prepared for that question.
No, that's okay. It's always kind of like a curveball, because we, chatting about all this real serious stuff and, pursuing your passions and stuff. It's oh yeah, what media have you been consuming that, you might want to share with people? Anyway, you can find me on Instagram Instagram and TikTok at sam.the.journalist. and on Twitter at SamOBJournalist. Thank you, Twitter, for making my life so much more difficult. This week, I'm going to plug the Dapper Danielle. She works actually at Disney in Florida, and she's got all these like real great like tidbits of information that she shares, and it's real awesome. And I really, really love hearing different things, even just about Disney in general, as kind of like a movie enthusiast. And she's on TikTok, so that'll be in the description. Thank you so much for jumping on, Claire. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. You can follow the podcast socials at Content, the letter N, Capable on Instagram and Twitter. You can send a super boring email to us through contentandcapablepod@gmail.com. The art was done by Opia. You can follow them on opia_art on Instagram. Opia is spelled OPIA. Feel free to message them about making art for your project. Our music was written, recorded, and edited by Nora Strauss-Reeves. You can find Nora at Kane_I, that's I as in the body part, on Instagram and Twitter. Feel free to message her about making music for your project or editing your podcast. I'm proud to be a part of the Movie Night Crew Network, which features the Restricted section, a chapter-by-chapter Harry Potter pod with lots of spoilers all the time, Of the Eldest Gods, a chapter-by-chapter Rick Riordan pod full of myths and legends, My Cabbages, an Avatar podcast that follows the true hero of Avatar The Last Airbender, the Cabbage Cart Guy, Fandom's Gone Wrong, a show that discusses all things fandoms, and the Movie Night Crew. Join some friends as they react to some terrible, some meh, and some really great movies.
Alrighty.
It's movie night.
Grab your popcorn,
grab your coffee,
grab your friend,
grab a cat.
And let's go!
Who directed this?
What year did it come out?
Is that girl from that show?
Who wrote this?
Where's the cat?
Who would you rather bang?
Pass the popcorn.
Does this pass the Bechdel test?
What about the Steve Buscemi test?
Does a woman literally speak in this movie?
Oh my god, a dog.
This reminds me of in Harry Potter when...
Are we recording?
What did the critics say?
It's a guilty pleasure.
What's your rating?
Can you be quiet?
Oh my god.
Movie Night Crew.
It's just like watching movies with your friends.
And then arguing about it after.
Every Sunday wherever you get podcasts.
Content and Capable is a podcast all about answering the question, how do you adult? Don't forget to rate and review it on your favourite podcatcher, and I will see you next Monday for another episode.
That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.